In this video, I'm going to cover the features of the animal kingdom. This is found in section 15.1 in your textbook, and it's a very helpful foundational vocabulary content for your animal presentation. So the essential question for this section: what features do all animals share, and what features are used to separate animals into smaller groups? So there are a lot of learning targets. I think there's actually 11. And I'll continue to go through these, and they're posted on my Bellarmine as well. So let's start with the first one. What characteristics do all animals share? So I have this picture, and admittedly there are some things that are not animals in here, but they are mostly animals, and they have things that they share. And to distinguish the different kingdoms, you should take a look at your 6-kingdom chart. And we filled half of this out, but you should be able to fill this out pretty comfortably by the end of the year for all 6 kingdoms. So we're really looking at this column here on the far right and working our way through those features. So it's not surprising to you that all animals are eukaryotic. They all are multicellular. They have no cell walls. They are all heterotrophic. And they have internal digestion, which is different than fungi with the external digestion. And then all animals have the ability to move. And then it says at some time in their lifetime, which kind of implies that they don't necessarily move their entire lifetime, which is definitely true. This is a phylogenetic tree of animals, and you see lots of features at the nodes here pointing out key characteristics, and the vocabulary activity and this video should help you have a pretty good understanding of that. So what are the differences between invertebrates and vertebrates? And my guess is that you already have a sense based on the vocabulary and your previous experiences, but I did insert this image that gives you some of these key points. Vertebrates have a backbone and invertebrates do not have a backbone. For support, vertebrates have that internal endoskeleton, where invertebrates might have an exoskeleton, or maybe they have some other type of support, which is maybe through water pressure, which would be a hydrostatic skeleton. The nervous tissue varies significantly, and then they give you some examples and some pictures. So this is another phylogenetic tree of invertebrates, and you'll see that there are some key features that occur, and we are going to work through some of these before this video is finished. Let's dig a little deeper into this term invertebrate. It's very often used, and I will end up using it a lot. It is really a poor scientific term because it's based on the lack of a feature versus a feature that's present. So the term vertebrate's a great term. If you're not a vertebrate, that makes you an invertebrate. But what are you then? Instead of being something that you're not, what are you? So we use it, but let's acknowledge that it's not very accurate. It's not very appropriate. So now the next target, incomplete versus complete digestive system. Let's dig in a little earlier. Heterotrophic, you have to consume your food, and it's digested within. Animals have widely varying mouth parts, as you can see in this video. But once it gets into the digestive system, it's either incomplete with only one opening or complete with 2 openings. So a jellyfish has an incomplete digestive system. There's one opening. The food gets put into this digestive tract, digested, and the waste comes out the same way it goes in. Whereas on this roundworm here, it has a mouth at one end and an anus at the other, and the digestive system goes the entire length. So that's a pretty significant adaptation. The next learning target, support systems. So I've mentioned some of this already, and this really comes into play when we take a look at chordates, right? And many chordates, not all, but many are vertebrates, where they have an endoskeleton. And you can see in this image, these animals all have bones within. It counts as an endoskeleton for fish that have a cartilaginous skeleton. And the purpose of that endoskeleton is that muscles attached to those bones really aids in movement. If you're an invertebrate, you don't have that that endoskeleton. You have to have some other form of support. So we are vertebrates with an endoskeleton. If you're an invertebrate, you have an exoskeleton on the outside or hydrostatic skeleton like an earthworm. And the muscles squeeze, and that forces the fluids inside to move, allowing the earthworm to move. So, what are the body cavities? To talk about body cavities, we've got to talk about early development of animals. So, this image starts with fertilization, where the egg and the sperm join, and then that divides into two cells, which will divide into 4, which will divide into 8, which will divide into 16. And here we have a solid ball of cells. It's just the whole mass is filled with cells. And then it will become hollow, like we see in this next stage. And then the ball will start to kind of invert in, and you see the two different colors. That's significant. And we end up getting different layers of tissues. And the endoderm is, in this image, the tan. The mesoderm in this image is the red, and the ectoderm is the blue on the outside. And these are tissue layers, and a tissue defined down here on the bottom, a group of cells working together. They typically are similar. And these layers, these dermal layers, these germ layers, will end up becoming different systems. Many animals start at this stage. And obviously they're going to become different, whether it's going to become an earthworm or whether it's going to become an elephant. But they all start with this similar beginning. And we know that the endoderm, the tan, is going to be the digestive system. The mesoderm could be muscular, circulatory, excretory, respiratory. And the ectoderm will become the nervous system and the skin. So originally we were talking about cavities. Now we can discuss our different cavities. There are 3 different types of cavities: acoelomates, pseudocoelomates, and true coelomates. The prefix a means without, the prefix pseudo means false, and a coelomate has a true body cavity. So let's discuss each of those. An acoelomate occurs in an organism called a planaria, a flatworm. We're going to actually look at live planaria in class. And there is this digestive cavity here in the center that food travels through. But there isn't a body cavity. The rest of the earthworm is solid cells. And this limits the size and complexity of these animals. A pseudocoelomate has this digestive cavity in the middle again. But then we see this fluid-filled cavity that's new. And this is a body cavity, but it's a false cavity because it's not fully lined with mesoderm. Now, if you found the mesoderm, it's the red, and it does line one side of this cavity, but it does not line the other side. So it's defined as a false cavity. What this cavity allows is increased size and mobility. This is a roundworm. Many roundworms are very small, but they can get up to 10 inches in size, which is a significant increase. The third cavity is a true body cavity. We have this digestive system, but then we have this body cavity, and now you can see how it's fully lined with mesoderm. That's a true body cavity. Now, this is significant. This allows complex internal organs and increased size, like whale size. So pseudocoelomates can only be up to about 10 inches. Now we have very complex body systems and massive size. So this is a significant advancement. Okay, the next two, protostomes and deuterostomes. So I'm hoping that proto and deutero, and you're thinking 1 and 2, right, which is helpful, or first and second, that's helpful. And if we go back to this development here, this opening, what that becomes matters. If that opening becomes the mouth, it's a protostome. If that opening does not become the mouth, it's a deuterostome. So when we look here, we see this is protostome and this is deuterostome. This opening becomes the mouth. The second opening becomes the anus for protostomes. This is assuming that you have a complete digestive system. In the deuterostome, this first opening becomes the anus and the second opening becomes the mouth. So there's just a very fundamental early developmental difference in these groups of animals. Body symmetry. There are lots of types of symmetry. There can be no symmetry, and these animals have little or no movement as an adult. Right? There can be radial symmetry, where this animal can be divided into two equal halves at multiple locations. And you can see in both of these images, these animals, that can be true. And there is no front or back, which is giving you a hint about how they move in any different direction. Bilateral symmetry means that the organism can be divided into two equal halves in only one location. And this organism has these four main directional locations: an anterior and a posterior, a front and a back, and a dorsal and a ventral. And the dorsal is always the back side, and the ventral is always the belly side. This was really hard for me to remember, and so don't giggle at my artistry here. Here's my fish. I could remember anterior and posterior pretty well, but I had a hard time with dorsal, the back side, and ventral, the belly side, until I remembered that the dorsal fin of a shark is the fin that breaks the surface of the water when a shark is swimming near the surface. I could remember the dorsal fin, and that made it easier for me. The significance here is now we have movement really just in one direction. You and I have bilateral symmetry, and we move primarily in one direction. It's not to say we can't move left and right. It's not to say we can't go backwards, but most of the time we're moving in one direction. Organisms with bilateral symmetry tend to have cephalization. Now, this squid does not quite in the same way. Sort of, but sort of. But we do see cephalization in all these other organisms. And they have a head end. We kind of have a head end. I guess we can say we have a head in a squid too, but it's kind of a big head. And we have a concentration of nervous tissue at that end. And that's significant because there's a lot of sensory input happening at that head end because it's always first. We often have segmentation with bilateral symmetry as well. Segmentation means we have repeated sum units. It's really obvious in this millipede where we have these segments that are repeating. This adds a lot of flexibility and a lot of movement, even if you have an exoskeleton. And you can even see it in this lobster. And some of the units are fused, like this cephalothorax is fused, even though you can see the remnant of the two units. There's some shared responsibility, but some students think that it has to be visible on the outside, and it doesn't. You can have the segmentation be internal. It's really obvious when we look at the endoskeleton of vertebrates, the vertebral column, and you can see even ribs. You can see in the tail lots of repeated subunits in lots of animals with bilateral symmetry. Movement. So, movement of animals depends a lot on where they're living, on how they move, and at what time of their life. So this anemone here spends much of its adult life sessile, attached to the substrate. They can kind of hop. It's pretty limited. I wouldn't really call it much movement, but they can. And this barnacle here has a sessile adult life. These appendages move, but the organism itself is attached to the substrate. Movement implies that you have some muscles, and muscles connect. So this is what happens with us with an endoskeleton. Our muscles attach to the bone, and the rigid bone acts as a lever. And when that muscle shortens, the bones move. So when this muscle shortens, the bones move in that direction. If this muscle were to shorten this direction, the bone would move that way. The opposite thing happens when you're looking with an exoskeleton. The attachments happen on the inside instead of the outside because the skeleton's on the outside. Same thing happens. This would be a great example of like a grasshopper leg or an insect leg. So how does the nervous system vary? Pretty significantly. So in a real simple animal like we have here with a hydra, we see a nerve net where we see nervous tissue running throughout the animal pretty evenly distributed. Sometimes there's a nerve ring like we see in some animals with radial symmetry. We also see this in an animal like an octopus. And then we see cephalization in lots of animals where we start to have a concentration of nervous tissue at one end, and then we see these cords. In a planary, we see two cords running down side by side, whereas in a human, we would just have that one nervous cord. Reproduction. Let's start with asexual, one parent. You've learned this before, no variation, and these are all examples of asexual reproduction. This is an example of budding, where this baby hydra is just growing off the parent, and this is an example of regeneration. Fragmentation is when something like coral gets broken apart and the different fragments can reproduce. And then parthenogenesis, where a female can create an embryo from an unfertilized egg. In sexual reproduction, we have egg and sperm. We have two parents, and we get that all-important variation. There are some organisms that are hermaphrodites that have both male and female reproductive organs. They don't self-fertilize. Fertilization can happen internally or externally. External fertilization tends to happen in water, where if you're going to live on land, internal fertilization has evolved. Well, there's three types of development when we get into many of these animals and sexual reproduction. And the first is ovipary, where the embryo develops inside an egg. The nutrition is provided by the yolk, and that development happens outside the mother's body. The young hatch from that egg into the environment, and these are all some examples. There are a lot of. Ovipary is very common in the animal kingdom. Ovovivipary, there's still the embryo developing an egg, still with the nutrition provided by the yolk, but the mother retains the egg inside her body. Extra protection. Eggs are a great source of nutrition for other animals, and this is a way of protecting. They hatch it from the egg inside the mother's body, and then she delivers them live. It looks like live birth, but it's not. So there are some insects, there are some snakes, and this is actually a whale shark giving birth. The final option is vivipary, live young. Of course, there are eggs, but the egg gets fertilized, and then that young develops inside the mother's body, typically inside a uterus. And so the mother gives birth to live young, and most mammals, not all, but most mammals have live young. So these kittens have already been born, and here's another one. And she'll have a large litter. It could be small, but she can have, I don't know, 8, 10 kittens. Cows give live birth. Most live birth happens head first, front feet and head first. Cows can have twins. It does happen. And this giraffe is giving birth. You can see the front 2 legs and the head. It's really important that the front 2 legs come so that there isn't any entanglement. And that's the best way. Another reproductive advancement is the amniotic egg. And this is an example. We have some really key parts here: the amnion, the embryo, the chorion, the yolk, and the allantois. And the embryo is the developing young, and the yolk provides the nutrition. And the allantois collects the waste, and you can see it. It's going to collect the waste in this space here. The amnion surrounds the young, the embryo, and the chorion lines the egg. So that's kind of a key feature of the amniotic egg. So you can see all of these features. This amniotic fluid puts the embryo in an aquatic environment. This would be similar to a regular egg, but this shell, which is really key, prevents the egg from drying out. This was a key advancement to living on land. So this advancement first occurs in reptiles, and then we see the amniotic egg in birds. And humans don't have an amniotic egg, but there's an amniotic sac within mammals as well. So the amniotic egg is a key advancement in animals. Finally, body temperature maintenance. So there are 2 options here: endotherms and ectotherms. So if you can remember, therm means temperature, and endo and ecto are internal and external. You can usually get a pretty good understanding here. But the key piece here is that if you're an ectotherm, you're dependent on the environment. You have a low metabolism, meaning you don't burn a lot of energy. You don't need a lot of calories. But you have to rely on the environment for your body temperature. So if you want to warm up, you got to lay in the sun. And if you want to cool off, you got to get out of the sun. You can't sweat. You can't shiver. But if you're an endotherm, you can maintain your body temperature. You burn a lot of calories, which means you need to eat a lot. It also allows you more environments. So you can find endotherms in really cold places, and you don't find ectotherms in really cold places. Endotherms have a way to stay warm at the North Pole, but ectotherms, you don't find reptiles there. So just reviewed all of those learning targets. There are a lot, and you want to make sure that you have a decent understanding of this essential question. There's also a Bozeman Science video posted in my Bellarmint that does a great job of reviewing this content, and I hope that was helpful.